Okay, welcome to session 11 in this preacher prep series. It's been a long while since we've gotten this done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of recap a little bit and kind of refresh where we were. I think that's probably the best thing to do. Get ourselves back on track. My apologies for not, the last 6 or 7 months kind of got crazy. So anyway, here we are. We've been looking at some things right now in the Gospel of Matthew, and you know that we've been looking at 3 categories of infallible proofs that Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ. And that's set forth right there in Matthew's Gospel in the first 2 chapters. So let's put this up. The first one is this, and let's do it like this. It is his supernatural generation. There's the first one. The second one is his supernatural birth. And we've been through these. We actually, when we start getting into the meat of what we're doing in this session today, I guess I need to start my timer on this thing. When we get into the meat of what we're doing on this today, we're actually going to be in this third category because these previous preacher preps have actually covered these kinds of issues. Just to kind of let it ring a bell with you, this is going to be chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. This is Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. And remember, these are broken into parts. The supernatural birth, we looked at 3 different aspects of that. One had to do with, Mary's pregnancy was not of man, but it was of God. And that was one of the things that we looked at there. The second thing is the testimony of the angel of the Lord and the name identifier that is given to the one that Mary is going to give birth to, that they shall call his name Jesus. It's that name identifier. The third part of that was the second name identifier. It was the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, and that second name identifier that they will call his name Emmanuel. Now, you're familiar. We went over all of this. It's been so long, I'm just trying to tie this back into where we've been so we'll have a context for what we're about to look at. So, we looked at the proofs under a supernatural generation. You can go back and look at all that if it's not coming back to you. Here are the 3. Here's the second category, his supernatural birth, and here's the 3 issues that were at stake in that. And now what we're going to do in Matthew chapter 2, in fact, all of chapter 2 is actually devoted to this third category of proofs, infallible proofs that Jesus is the Christ. And what this has to do with is we're calling this his royal reception. In other words, the things that are happening in the first 2 years that follow his birth, and that is going to happen in Matthew chapter 2, the entire chapter, verses 1 to 23. I'm pretty sure that's right. But anyway, this also was broken down into parts. There's 4 parts to this thing. And let me just give them to you quickly. The first one is the star prophecy. Now, we got into this just a little bit in session 10. This is actually session 11, if I didn't mention that at the first of the preacher prep. And I'm pretty sure that's right. Now that I'm saying it, I'm not sure. But I think I did say it at the first. Let me just look. Yeah, this is 11. Okay. So the first thing you had is that star prophecy. We're going to pick that up today, and we're going to continue to do some things in that. But there's 3 more parts to this third category of infallible proofs that go along with that. Let me just put them up here. He's also the part where he is going to flee into Egypt, the part also about the children that are killed, and that is the fulfillment of the prophecy out of Jeremiah. In Ramah there should be weeping, and we'll talk about all of that when we get over there. And then the last one is that he will be called a Nazarene. All right. And so there's the layout. And those are the things that we're looking at in the first two chapters of Matthew's Gospel that present Christ, present Jesus as the Christ with three categories of undeniable, infallible proofs. And so what we're going to do now is take these up. As I said just a moment ago, we've already done some work in session 10 on the star prophecy. And all of these are going to take place in those first 2 years of his life. And what is happening is that a member of the nation of Israel is going to be confronted with all of these proofs so that they will be forced to make a decision one way or another. And if they see these proofs and they have honesty of heart, what's going to happen is they're going to reject the vain apostate system, religious system of Israel and the things that go along with it, and they're going to turn to Jesus as the Christ. Okay, now, kind of getting ourselves back on track with this star prophecy. This star prophecy was given to some Gentiles. And you can look back, and I know some of this we kind of started covering in that last session, so what I want to do is just kind of take a little bit of that and transition into material that we haven't covered. But this is given to some Gentiles who are living in a land that the Bible describes east of Israel. Now, we're going to turn to a passage, and because this is preacher prep, we don't have the PowerPoint up on this. I just run it all by myself. So you need to get your Bible, and you need to turn now to Numbers chapter 24, because this is where we're going to go to take a look at this star prophecy. This prophecy is given to some Gentiles. It's given to them in a land east of Israel. They see his star in the east, and those wise men are going to respond properly to what they see. Now, we're going to explain this because there's some very important things here. But one of the things that I want you to have in your mind is this, that if Jesus had not been born, this star never would have appeared. If Jesus was not the Messiah, this star never would have appeared. The prophecy, if he wasn't the Messiah, this prophecy would still be waiting for the one for whom it was intended. If he was not the Messiah, not only would that star not have appeared, but those wise men would have never made that journey to Jerusalem. Now think about this. And that means that the rest of the things that are sitting in Matthew 2 would not have been fulfilled either. Those things would not have taken place. The thing about it is, every single part of all of these proofs have to come to pass, or he hasn't met all the requirements. And so there's a whole lot riding on this star prophecy. If he's not the Christ, his star doesn't appear. If he's not the Christ, they don't come into Israel. The wise men don't come into Israel. That star never does show up. There is no fleeing into Egypt. Those children are not going to be killed, and there's not going to be the Nazarene name issue that's going to be given. Well, we'll take a look at all of that as we progress through, but in this session, what I want to do is I want to begin by examining what it was that those wise men were given and how they were responding to that, because there's more here than meets the eye. Now, as I said a moment ago in getting you to turn over to Numbers chapter 24, this is where that star prophecy is found. We're going to do just a real brief overview of this. You'll need to do some work on this on your own to to pull out the real details of it. But before we read this, it's important for you to realize several things. And that is to realize when this prophecy was originally given. Next, and to know to whom it was given. It was not given, the star prophecy was not given to the nation of Israel. Where was it that they saw his star? They saw it in the east. Now, when they were in Jerusalem, that star wasn't appearing. But as they made their way toward the place of his birth, that star appeared, it led them, and it stood over the house where the child Jesus was. That's what the Scripture says. And by the way, this is given to a very particular group of Gentiles. Now, in Numbers chapter 24, let me set the context for you here. You have a guy named Balak, who is going to be the king of the Moabites. You've got a guy named Balaam. Balaam is a false prophet. He is. And Balak, the king, sins for Balaam. Now, he hates Israel. And boy, there's some typology going on here, and we're going to talk about that typology. But he sends for Balaam, and Balaam comes out of the mountains of the east. In other words, east of the land of Israel. Again, this is important because that's going to be the place where they first see his star. And we'll tie all this up, but just keep it in your mind. There's a particular territory that Israel is later going to find themselves in Daniel's day. When they're taken captive at the start of the 5th course of punishment, you know they're carried away captive in the Babylonian captivity. And actually, before the Babylonian captivity, the northern kingdom is carried away into Assyria. All right, now just keep that in your mind. There's a lot that needs to be understood about this, but this event that we're about to read is highly significant. There's some important details here that if you have in your mind, it'll cause you to see that, well, just to enumerate, Satan's policy of evil against Israel is one of those things. God's use of Israel to repossess the land, and the destruction of Satan's dominion on the earth. All of those things are going to be mentioned in this passage. So there's a provoking that's going on here, I guess is the way I could say that. Now, there's something else that's easy to overlook here. Again, I know I'm saying that. It doesn't mean much to you right now, but it will by the time we get through. Okay. There's some significance to the events that are going on here that's easy to miss. And the reason that it's easy to miss them is because, first of all, the audience here that actually witnesses and hears what's going on is very small. You have Balak and you have Balaam. And there's a few emissaries, we'll read about them in a minute, a few emissaries that are there with them. But this group, this audience, human audience, is pretty small. And I'm gonna tell you that the real audience that God has in mind here is not so much the human audience as it is Satan himself. God is about to take the battle to the adversary and to do something that's serving notice to Satan. And again, because there's just so few people involved here, it just looks like it's not that important. God's actually doing something else. God is going to put words of blessing in the mouth of Balaam. I don't know that I need to rehearse this incident, do I? Well, we'll read it and then we'll talk about it. But, you know, Balak is going to ask this false prophet to pronounce curses on the nation of Israel, and instead blessing comes out of his mouth. And what God is doing by that is he is actually uttering some fighting words to the adversary. He is driving home the point that there is absolutely nothing that Satan can do that will stop God's plan and purpose to utilize Israel in the repossession of the earth. There's absolutely nothing that Satan can do to prevent God from doing with this nation of people what he called them forth to do. And this is God's way of challenging the adversary. Now, also in Numbers chapter 24, there's a reference to a time of contention that's going to be coming along. And this contention is begun by Satan with Amalek. We're going to see that in just a moment. And then we go forward. Now, that's way back when they come out of the land of Egypt. But when we go forward out here into the Lord's day of wrath, or what we commonly call the tribulation, or if you're looking at that breakdown in Leviticus 26 or Deuteronomy 28, it's that fifth and final part of the fifth course of punishment. It's out there when this dispensation of Gentile grace has come to an end, that out there's a period of time called the last days, or the latter days. So let me just write this up. This period of time that starts with Amalek and goes all the way to the latter days. And this land area that's being talked about here and is involved in this is in play all the way to the end. In Numbers 24, you not only have some messages and some prophecies, but you have some warnings and you have some utterances that all have to do with what God is going to be doing out there in the latter days. And by the way, those utterances have to do with the nations that not only are there during the time of Numbers 24, but the nations that's going to be involved in what's happening out here in these latter days. We'll talk about those nations in just a little bit. Okay, now God knows that Israel is, God knows that when Israel comes into the land, that the idea is to spew those nations, those Gentile nations, out of the land of Israel. There are nations that we're going to read about in Numbers 24 that even though it's happening back there, those nations, my understanding is they may be known by a different name, but it will still be that same breakdown of nations will still be in play in the latter days out there. And also the land that is going to be referenced here that is east of Israel. Balaam comes from that land. Remember, we talked about him coming from the mountains of the east. And so through Balaam, God is going to give that land from which he comes, that land east of Israel. And I really don't want to put a map up. I don't want to take up my space, but you know, if you're looking at a map and you know, here's the, you have the Mediterranean Sea coming down this way, and you got that little that swath of Israel. And if you'll go out east of there, there is a land from which Balaam came, and he's going to go back to that land, and he's going to know about these events that are said in Numbers chapter 24. He's going to carry that back over to that land. That's very, very important. And there's going to be some information given to the people that are in that land. And that information contains a warning not only about the things that are going to be happening in the latter days, but it's going to warn them about the Lord's Christ. It's going to warn them about a counterfeit Christ that we would call Antichrist that's going to come out of that land. It's going to talk to them about Satan's utilization of this man who is going to come and propose himself to be Israel's Messiah. All of those things are going to be put forth here and referenced to, and other things are going to add to that as we go on through. But it's to the people in the land from which the Antichrist is going to come that God is going to give them some information about the true Christ in advance. God's going to give them a chance to disassociate themselves from, I don't want to say the apostate element because I use that term with Israel all the time, but those that are going to reject the true Christ and would actually continue to be an enemy of God's people, God's going to give them a chance to not be complicit with the future Antichrist that's going to come out of this land in the latter days. They're given information in Numbers 24. They're given information. We'll talk about it. You're going to get it again in Daniel. You're going to get it again in Esther, and there's some places where all that's going to come to pass. But they're given this information in Numbers 24, and they're given some things about God's Christ and about the Antichrist, Satan's counterfeit. He's not going to be called the Antichrist over there. But during the time that Israel is in the land, during the first two installments, now we're talking about here and here, during the time that Israel is in the land, during the first two installments of the fifth course. Not the first two courses of punishment. I should get my terminology right. In the first two parts of the fifth cycle of punishment, which is the Babylonian captivity and the times of the 49 years under the Medes and the Persians with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. What in the world am I thinking? That there's some information that is available to every Gentile that is in that land east of Israel. Now, they already had that Numbers chapter 24 information given to them, and during those two parts, more information is going to be added. Daniel's going to give you some things. When you go over to the book of Esther, Mordecai and Esther are going to give you some things. And if the people in that land east of Israel respond properly to the information that is given to them as it pertains to things taking place out in the latter days, they will be able to identify some things on the time schedule. Not only that, because of that information that's all given to them here, by the time you get over here, they will know the time schedule. They will know what to look. They'll know to look for his star. And then when they see it, they'll know what to do about that. They're going to have a chance then to pledge their allegiance to God and to disassociate themselves from their own country's involvement with the Antichrist. The people out here are going to have all of that behind them as well. They're going to have that opportunity. All right, so now with this very minimal, and I almost am debating this as we're doing it about how much more I need to say about this. I know I've given you a lot of loose ends, and we're going to tie them up. But boy, this is just the barest of sketches about what we really ought to be looking at here. But I think what I can do is lay a good foundation for you here, and you'll be able to go on and fill in a lot of details on your own. And you know, I'm looking at the time, and I know how much I have to cover in this session. So really, let's just leave it at this. You can study out the details on your own, and this is going to help you with some things. Not the least of which is, when you get back over into Matthew 2, it's going to help you understand some things about Herod, the things that he understood, that he didn't think this was a joke, that he took this, to be a reality, and it's going to give you some insight into Herod over in Matthew 2. Okay, so now that you're in Numbers 24, let's take this up in verse 10, and let's start reading this now. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 10. This is going to show, look, I've jumped ahead in this thing. Balak the king calls Balaam from the mountains of the east, and he comes to Balak and he says, I want you to pronounce a curse on Israel. And instead of a curse, a blessing comes out of Balaam's mouth. Balak is angry about it, and what we're about to read is his displeasure at this prophecy. Numbers 24:10. And Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together. And Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee thou to thy place. I thought to promote thee unto great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. Well, you can see in verse 11, that Balak says to Balaam, you know what, just go home. Get out of my sight. I don't want you around here. That's what he's saying to him. Now, before Balaam can actually do that, just pick up and leave, God has one more message he's going to deliver through the mouth of Balaam. And this is actually an incredible thing, because Balaam is not one of the good guys. So there's something going on here. This is great. Look in verse 14 of Numbers 24. And now, behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. Now, we're going to come back to this in a little bit for a couple of reasons. But what I want you to notice is that what Balaam is saying is, okay, I'm going to go home, but before I do, I'm going to, and he uses this term, I'm going to advertise thee. And we talked about this latter days concept, so I'm going to put it here. Advertise thee. What this people will do to thy people in the latter days. So there's a prophecy that's being given here. But that's an interesting way of saying it, isn't it? I will advertise thee. We're going to come back to that, and I want you to see the significance of saying it that way instead of just saying, instead of, in fact, the Bible only uses this phrase twice, here and over in the book of Ruth. We're going to look at both of those before we're done because this is important. But again, we'll come back to it. Let's finish up on the point that we're looking at. Verse 15 in Numbers 24. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor has said, and the man whose eyes are open has said, he has said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. And when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. And he looked on the Kenites, and took up his parable and said, Strong is thy dwelling place, and thou puttest thy nest in a rock. Nevertheless the Kenites shall be wasted, until Asher shall carry thee away captive. And he took up his parable and said, Alas, who shall live when God doeth this? And ships shall come from the coast of Chittim, and shall afflict Asher, and shall afflict Eber, and he also shall perish forever. And Balaam rose up and went, and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. Now what you're reading here, that is the star prophecy. This is what the wise men believed. This is the thing that they had received as information. They believed that information, and they looked for something special in connection with it. They looked for his star to appear. And when they saw it, they responded positively to what they saw so that they would avoid the negative consequences of not responding properly to it. Now that doesn't sound like much right now, but it's going to. What they recognized is that this thing was directed at them. They lived in the very land against whom this or against which this prophecy was directed. They recognized that their nation was going to be under the leadership of the character that this prophecy was directed against. And that out of their nation there was going to come opposition to God and the one that he was going to set up to be the scepter bearer. All of that's contained in Numbers 24. All right, now look at verse 17. Let's just go back and pull this out and highlight something here. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. Now, these are the verses that constitute the very core of the star prophecy. The star shows up in the passage here in verse 17. And when you go to Matthew and those wise men say, we have seen his star in the east, that's what is being referred to. When you go back to Numbers 24, the star there is what's being referred to. When Balaam says, I shall see him, but not now, I shall behold him, but not nigh, what he's saying is, this is all coming in the future. So he's making it clear that this is not something that's going to happen at this particular point in time. Now, that's not a stretch, because you've already been told that this is what's going to befall the Moabites from Israel in the latter days, remember? So you see, all of this is lining up just right. So this prophecy is not for the time of Numbers 24, but it's sitting out there in the latter days. Look back at verse 14. And now, behold, I go unto my people, come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. Now, you know from what's said here in verse 16, and we didn't read down to verse 16, but we have twice already now. It says that what comes out of Balaam's mouth is the words of God. But not only that, in fact, let's just read verse 16, because there's something else that comes out of his mouth that's important to notice. Numbers 24:16. He has said, which heard the words of God, and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. He mentions this as the Most High, and you already know that the title, the Most High, is referring to the possessor of heaven and earth. And you know that. You also know that that was Satan's goal. That was the fifth I will, tucked away over there in Isaiah 14, where it was recorded the plan and the ultimate goal of Satan, that he will be like the Most High. In other words, he wants to be the possessor of heaven and earth. And so this is a response to the adversary. This is what the reason this gets brought up is because God knows that's his plan, to be like the Most High. And the issue of who is going to be the Most High is going to have to do with this climactic time out here in the Lord's day of wrath, when God is going to settle once and for all his contention with the adversary over who has the right to be the Most High. God's going to, this is all going to culminate and come to a head and get resolved right out here. There's going to be everybody's going to pour their resources out, and God's giving a prophecy through a false prophet to say, this is what's going to happen, and there's not anything you can do to stop it. This is where it's going. So this prophecy not only involves these Gentile nations, excuse me, these Gentile nations that are going to be utilized by the Antichrist out here in the final part of this fifth course of punishment, but it has a very particular application to the very nation from which that Antichrist character will come. And here's the thing that's remarkable about this. This has all been put in the mouth of a false prophet who is excuse me, who is a type of the false prophet, who is going to be the Antichrist's sidekick in Daniel's 70th week, the tribulation, or the Lord's day of wrath. Balaam is a type of the false prophet. God puts these words in his mouth. Now, what you have to understand, Balaam is a guy that Satan has been utilizing. Balak thinks that Balaam is going to come along and cooperate with this thing fully. And when he opens his mouth, instead of curses, blessings for Israel come out. And then a prophecy about what's going to happen to Moab and all these other nations that are going to confederate with this counterfeit that's coming out of this land from the east, coming out of where Balaam is from. And then after he speaks this thing, he goes back to the country he comes from, which is the country the Antichrist is going to come from. So what we have is this prophecy is now located in two places. Not only is it going to get located in the land of Israel because it's recorded in Numbers 24 as part of the law, books of the law, but it's going back to Balaam's country. Balaam's going to carry that back with him. And it's interesting that the Bible points out, see, before, I would have read that and thought nothing about why would Balak say, go back to your country, and Balaam said, okay, I'm going back to my country. I would never have thought, why even include that in the canon of Scripture? Why is that important? And the reason that is important is because you're being told, you're being shown that this thing that is talked about in Numbers 24 is actually going to travel back to the country from which the Antichrist himself is going to come. And this information is going to be resident for people in that country way before he shows up in the latter days. But it also involves more than just the Moabites. Remember, Balak is the king of the Moabites. They're a type of a people who are going to be utilized by Satan out here in the latter days. The Moabites are. But there's some other people that are going to be utilized as well. Balak is a type of how Satan is going to utilize the Antichrist in the last days. What that means is Balak is a type of the Antichrist. The way Satan is using Balak in Numbers 24 at that time is the way he's going to utilize the Antichrist out in the latter days. Balaam is a type of the false prophet. And the way Satan is utilizing him in Numbers 24 is the same way he's going to utilize the false prophet out in the latter days. And if we had time to go over it, we could go through the Scripture and show that Balak is actually in the line of the Antichrist. But another time. Satan's use of Balak in Numbers 24 I'm sorry, is like a rehearsal or a dry run for what's going to be happening out here in the last days. That's literally what's going on. So you have Balak functioning just like the Antichrist. You have Balaam functioning just like the false prophet. And they're seeking together to accomplish a specific goal. So what is that goal? The goal in Numbers chapter 24 is the same goal that's going to be done out here in the latter days. Doesn't that make sense? It's the cursing of the nation of Israel and the prevention of them being utilized in God's plan and purpose for them. See, that was the purpose in Numbers 24. Let's keep them from being utilized by God in what He's going to be doing with this nation, which is going to result in the repossession of the earth back to God. That's being thwarted. So let's put curses on these people. That's exactly what's going to be happening out there in the latter days. And Moab is still going to be around out in the latter days. They're part of that confederate of nations that join with the Antichrist to try to wipe the name of Israel from the memory of the earth. They are the Moabites are major players among that 10-nation confederation. And that's why they're mentioned the way they are in Psalm 83. Go ahead and turn over to Psalm 83. And there's something we want to look at over there. So just go ahead and turn over there. And they're listed here. In fact, in Psalm 83, you have a list of all of those nations. Now, maybe I can quit that coughing now. Psalm 83, look with me in verse 1. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, And they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asher also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. Now let's count these up. Look back up here. Start in verse 6. The tabernacles of, here, by the way, back up further than that. It says in verse 2 that these are God's enemies. They've lifted up the head. They've taken crafty counsel against thy people. That's the people of Israel. They've consulted against thy hidden ones. That's the members of the believing remnant of Israel that are scattered and dispersed and in hiding for their very lives from the Antichrist, the hidden ones. Verse 4, they've said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. You see, that's what they're trying to do there. That's what they were going to try to do back there in Numbers 24. It said they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. And that's why I call them that 10-nation confederation. Excuse me. Now let's count them up. Verse 6. The tabernacles of Edom, 1, and the Ishmaelites, 2, of Moab, 3, the Hagarenes, 4, Gebal, 5, and Ammon, 6, and Amalek, 7, the Philistines, 8, the inhabitants of Tyre, 9, Asher, 10, is joined with them. And then after the colon it says, they have holpen the children of Lot. Who are the children of Lot? The children of Lot are the Moabites and the Ammonites. Well, they're already listed in this list. Verse 6 has Moab and verse 7 has Ammon. The Moabites and the Ammonites are already listed in the list. They're called to our attention at the end of verse 8, pointing them out as the children of Lot. And it says that the rest of the 10 holpen or assist the children of Lot in what they're doing in the last days, because those are major players among the 10. They're movers and shakers out there in the last days. Now the leadership doesn't go to them, it goes to Asher, which is Assyria, which is why Balaam is spoken of the way he is in Numbers 24 down in verses 20 to 24. Now we'll have opportunity to maybe look at that a little bit, or you can read it on your own, but I need to decide how much we're going to do on that. But I want to look back at the verses now that make up the core of this star prophecy, because now that we've kind of come through this and we've seen this, look back at verse 15 in Numbers chapter 24. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor has said, and the man whose eyes are open has said, he hath said, which heard the words of God, and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a capital S scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab. So here's Balak hearing about what's going to happen to his people in the latter days. And it says, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession, Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies. And Israel shall do valiantly, out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. Now look at the pronouns that are kind of emphasized them as we read through. Back up in verse 17, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him. That is all linked together with the star. The wise men with the help of Daniel later on, giving them something about a time schedule, knew that his star would be the sign of his coming, and that a scepter would be given to him. Now they knew all of that in advance. Let's talk about something else in this verse, and that is the children of Sheth, listed at the end of verse 17. The children of Sheth is not talking about a specific country. It is rather referring to those people who are involved in the tumult. Remember what he said back up there? Let's see. Let me look back here in the verses that we were reading here in Psalm 83. He says in verse 2, "For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head." And then he mentions those 10 nations. These are the ones that are involved in the tumult. The children of Sheth are the 10 nations of people who are involved in trying to wipe the name of Israel off the earth. They're involved in opposition to Israel and rebellion against God, and they're involved in these overthrow concepts to the nation of Israel. Now, Sheth is one of those early nomenclatures for the one that we call the Antichrist. The Antichrist is nothing more but another. You have Antichrist, you have man of sin. Look, I'm not going to go into a list of all that's involved in this, but when he the children of Sheth is talking about those that are following. This is talking about something that's coming up, something that's going to be happening out in the latter day. And Sheth is this Antichrist, the one that Balak is a type of. This is just one more name. Now, why are these different names? And we could put up a few more. Why these different names? Why all these? Because when we read them in the Bible, we just read them as a synonym. But they're more than just a synonym. They're actually emphasizing specific aspects of the activity going on in the context in which you find the terms. There's another. Let me give you another one. Son of perdition. Yes, they're all talking about the same person, but they're talking about they're emphasizing a different aspect of what's going on with this same person. And so here, as an Antichrist, you're talking about the one that is going to be the counterfeit Christ, who is actually not only opposed to Christ, but actually is going to come to the nation of Israel and be received by them as Christ. He's going to be in the place of Christ. That word anti does mean against, but it also has the meaning of in place of. And he's going to fulfill both aspects of that. The man of sin is talking about a particular aspect. And that's it. We find both of these phrases over in 2 Thessalonians, where Paul is going to be emphasizing two different aspects of his activities. And this is the way he gets described. Well, when you get to Sheth, you're talking about his work with the 10-nation confederation in the latter days. And those people that joined that tumult, that joined the attempt to overthrow Israel, they are the children of Sheth. So the point I'm trying to make to you is this is not about a country. The children of Sheth, because if you're trying to scratch your head and say who is Sheth and who are his children, that's actually a name or a title that is given to the Antichrist that's going to come out of that country, the country where the star is first seen, the country where the prophecy went back with Balaam to, the country that was given information not only from Numbers 24, but also in the book of Daniel and the book of Esther about the things that are happening out here. The same country from which the wise men came, and the same country from which the Antichrist is going to come. So when you see all of that, God is pouring a lot of information into this country, and that's not an accident. That's not, and you're supposed to notice that, because there's a conclusion that you're supposed to come to. Now, okay, where were we? We were reading Numbers 24, verses 15 to 19. Did we read all of those? Children of Sheth, that's what we were talking about, was mentioned in verse 17, and that's just one of those descriptive titles that's given to the Antichrist. Those that are with him are his children. Now look, Numbers 24 at verse 20. And when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. Now we read this whole thing through a while ago, and if you notice that, where it talked about Amalek being the first of the nations, he is not talking about Amalek being the first the first people to ever be a nation. That's not what is being referred to here. Amalek is the first nation to be utilized by Satan in its opposition against Israel after they come out of the land of Egypt. When Israel comes out of Egypt, Satan's policy of evil against them has to change. Before, they were in the land of Egypt, and he brought in a Pharaoh that, didn't know Joseph or Joseph's God, and he starts this thing in Egypt, but God delivers them out of that. And once they're out, they've been in there for 430 years. Once they're out, Amalek becomes the very first nation to afflict Israel, and they do that on their journey, as they're journeying when they come out of the land of Egypt, making their way toward the promised land. Now, once Israel, and I say that's the first nation because once Israel is redeemed, and I'm using that term to refer, this is the way the Bible talks about this, to refer to them being brought out of Egypt. Once Israel has been redeemed out of Egypt, Amalek is the very first nation to oppose them. And that's not an accident. Satan is utilizing this nation to do just that. By the way, they're part of that prophecy. We're reading it here in Numbers 24 about what's going to happen to Amalek. It says he may have been the first. Remember, I talked to you a while ago. I said this whole thing covers Satan's use of the nations to oppose Israel, starting at Amalek, back when they came out, and going all the way through to the 10-nation confederation out here in the final part of the fifth course of punishment. So the beginning is Amalek, and the end is going to be the Antichrist and his confederation. So you're given a broad scope of everything that's going to be happening there. Now, we're not going to go into the details of this, but once Israel comes out of the land of Egypt, I was talking to you about Satan making a change in the way that he was going to oppose Israel and his policy of evil. And indeed he does, because now there are other nations that he can bring into play. They were kind of insulated in Egypt, but once they're redeemed and they come out and the Lord delivers them, Amalek may be the first, but boy, there's a whole line of nations now that are going to come against them. Now, what nation is it? We've been talking around this the whole time. There's a 10-nation confederation. Where's that land that Balak is from? I haven't mentioned that to you yet. Where's that land from which the Antichrist is going to come? Where's that land that the star was seen? Where's that land that the prophecy of Numbers 24 was carried back to by Balaam? Where is that land? What land is that? And you can find it in Numbers 24, verse 22. Nevertheless, the Kenites shall be wasted until Asher shall carry thee away captive. Asher is Assyria. Let's read the next verse. And he took up his parable and said, Alas, Who shall live when God doeth this? And ships shall come from the coast of Chittim, and shall afflict Asher, and shall afflict Eber, and he also shall perish forever. And that's the end. That's God's going to wipe it all out, and that's going to be the end. This prophecy is directly pointed or directed at the nations who make up the children of Sheth, the ones that are going to join in that. and in the Numbers 24 time, you're talking about Balak, who's a type of the Antichrist, and Balaam, who's a type of the false prophet. They get pointed out. This country that Balaam is from is to the east of Israel. That's the focus of the prophecy. And as I was saying, it's the place from which the wise men come. It's the place where the prophet goes back to. And so look in Numbers 23. Let's back up a chapter and look with me in verse 5, because I want to identify the area that Balaam is coming from. Numbers 23, and we'll start reading in verse 5. And the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, Return unto Balak, and thus shalt thou speak. And he returned unto him, and lo, he stood by his burnt sacrifice, he and all the princes of Moab. And he took up his parable and said, Balak the king of Moab hath brought me from Aram out of the mountains of the east, saying, Come curse me Jacob, and come defy Israel. Aram is that Assyrian Chaldean land area. That is a term that encompasses both of those. By the way, the Antichrist is going to be involved in both of those geographic areas. By the way, that's Aram, when they were captive to Babylon, the Chaldeans, Babylon. That's why the language, when it's referred to out of that, is called Aramaic. That region known as Aram. That's where that name comes from. That's the area from which Balaam came. It's the area where the star of prophecy was sent. It's the area from which the Antichrist would rise. And it's the area where the star was seen by those who knew to look for it. Now, let me take you back to something else that we pointed to earlier, and the fact that this prophecy was called an advertisement. He said, I will advertise thee what shall happen to thy people in the latter days. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 14. And now behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. Now when you advertise something, if you're talking about in the biblical sense, you're not just making it known. I understand that's the way it's thought of today. But what we have today is a very weakened form. When he talks about advertise, that's a very weakened form the way we understand it today. Today we put an advertisement in the paper, and it may be a legal notice, or it may be just a store that's letting you know something is on sale. And we use that term in a lot of different ways. But in the Bible, this word was a much stronger word that was understood to be more than just you're simply giving notice about something. I'm not saying it doesn't have to do with giving notice, but it's more than that. If you look at that word back during the time, I don't know if, I should have looked it up in Crabs because that thing is back in the 1800s, but if you go back to when the King James translators put that word in, what you would understand about that word at that time is that it means to make something known in the sense that there is vital, critical, almost life and death information that is functioning as a fair warning for those to whom it is given. And those people, by this fair warning, are being given an opportunity to respond to this before suffering the consequences of failing to respond or negatively responding. In other words, It's a warning of impending danger or trouble that includes vital information given in a public form so that people can act upon that information before the danger arrives. So it's a much more intense term in the Bible than the way we would use that in our vocabulary today. In a legal setting, it was the fair warning given in advance to take a particular course of action to avoid serious consequences or to avoid suffering grievous loss in some manner or form, from which, if that fair warning wasn't heeded, there would be no recourse. Now that puts a whole new dimension on this word advertise. And again, I probably should have just pulled the book out and read that to you, but in view of how this word is supposed to be understood in your Bible, this prophecy then, Balaam's telling him right at the start when he says, I will advertise thee, you're meant to understand from that, and what Balak is meant to understand from that, and anybody reading the scripture, and when that prophecy goes back to that land in the east, what they're meant to understand is this prophecy is serving as a fair warning to the nations who are going to be utilized against Israel in the latter days. And it's directed especially to the country from which Balaam comes. The country is given information. And that information is the character that would come out of them. Sheth is not the true Christ. He's Satan's Christ. The prophecy concerns the true Christ and the warning to respond to him properly. That's what the star aspect of that was all about. The wise men understand that, they heed that warning, and they respond properly to the true Christ when they see his star, knowing what that is, and they travel to worship him. You know what they're doing? They're taking heed of the fair warning. Why? Because they don't want to be involved in the danger, the consequences that are going to be the result of ignoring this warning. Because there is going to be no recourse if a person ignores this warning. Now, as I said to you earlier, the word advertise is mentioned in your Bible 2 different times. Here in Numbers 24 and again over in the book of Ruth. You can turn to the book of Ruth in chapter 4, and we're going to read some verses out of there because I want you to see it over there. In the book of Ruth, just to set the context, Boaz is talking to his older brother about providing a redemption for Naomi. And this is a legal issue. So now we're looking at the word advertise in a legal setting. And so take a look at it in Ruth chapter 4, and we'll start reading in verse 3. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee. Do you see it there? I thought to advertise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know, for there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. Now this is a legal proceeding that's taking place, and without going into all the details or rehearsing that entire story, you're going to see at the end of this legal proceeding that is signified by the removing of Boaz's brother's shoe. Take a look in verse 6. And the kinsman said, because there's going to be more, and he can't do this more. So he winds up saying in verse 6, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. Now, it may not be a legal proceeding the way that we would do things today, but in Israel at that time, that's exactly what it was. Now, I want to make a couple of points with regard to this. First of all, Boaz is giving fair warning to his brother concerning a couple of things. First of all, the redemption that needs to be made with Naomi. But the second thing he does, if you read this whole account, is he is actually warning him to make sure that he can meet all of the qualifications of a redeemer. As it turns out, and that's why he says, I thought to advertise thee, because in connection with that, there was either going to be consequences to his brother's own inheritance or an opportunity lost with regard to the redemption that was going on here. Well, I don't want to get bogged down in that story. I'm just showing you the other time it was used. It was used in a legal setting. But the star prophecy is a fair warning as well. God gave it long in advance to the very land east of Israel that it would affect. The wise men, based on Daniel's prophecy, had a timetable or a time schedule to guide them to look for the star prophecy to come to pass. It wasn't like that for generations they all just went out every night and looked for the star. There was actually a time schedule sitting in the book of Daniel. And where was Daniel sitting? Right there, in the land of Babylon. When they saw it, when those wise men saw that star, they believed. They came to worship him that was born King of the Jews. But turn to Psalm 2. Because what they were doing is exactly what was spelled out in Psalm 2. Now I want you to see this. Psalm 2. Verse 1. Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder, and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. First 4 verses that we just read describe what is taking place in the opening chapters of the book of Acts. In other words, Psalm 2, 1 through 4 sits right here. That's exactly what's being referred to there. That's the 1-year extension of mercy that Jesus promised that when he talked about it back in the book of Luke, that was going to be given to Israel after his death on the cross. Verse 5 now begins talking about the Lord's day of wrath. Well, what did we skip? Well, we skipped the dispensation of Gentile grace. Well, why would that be okay? Because it was a mystery that can't show up in these verses, because it was hidden and kept secret until the Lord Jesus Christ revealed it personally to Saul of Tarsus, whom he called to be an apostle, and wrote as our apostle Paul the 13 epistles that provide doctrine for us in that dispensation of grace. So from verse 5 down through the psalm, you have what is taking place in the Lord's day of wrath, or the tribulation. But now look at verse 10 in Psalm 2. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. When his wrath is kindled but a little would refer to the very first part when Israel's program gets itself back underway and resumes again, following the completion of the dispensation of grace and the blessed hope. So he says, kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. So there's a period of time there where people are going to have an opportunity to make a choice. The wise men, when they come, they have all of this information already. And so when they come, they are, you know what they're doing? By coming and worshiping him, they are disassociated. Why in the world would they do that? because they have been given information that tells them there's someone, Sheth is coming out of our own country, and he's not the right one. And all the children of Sheth, those that follow him in the tumult, in the rebellion, in the overthrowing, and all of that, they're going to be cast down in the Lord's day of wrath. These wise men are disassociating themselves from the children of Sheth. They know, look, they're here. No one knows about this. You know all they're thinking? That day of wrath is right around the corner, and they don't want to perish in the way. Psalm 2. So they come to worship him. That's the only appropriate response. Now turn to the book of Daniel. At the start of the 5th course of punishment, you know that Israel is sent out of the land. Where are they sent to? Well, they're sent into the land of Aram, the northern kingdom into Assyria, southern kingdom into Babylon. They're sent into the very land where the star prophecy is going to be carried by Balaam. Now, when Israel is carried away in the Assyrian, Babylonian captivities, information is given to Daniel concerning a time schedule for how God is going to carry out his contention over the land of Israel. And that time schedule can be attached to the information that's given in Numbers 24. That means that everything given to Daniel was available to those Chaldean, Persian wise men in the land of Aram. Now that's pretty marvelous to think about. During Daniel's life, some things take place in Nebuchadnezzar, that's Babylon, and later in Darius, which is, and Cyrus, which is the Medes and Persians. In the very land of Aram, the people in that land at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, Cyrus, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, are going to be confronted with the reality of the true and living God. Now think about this. They're going to be confronted not only with that, but who his nation is, and they're going to know for certain it's not them. Now think about what God's doing here. He's serving fair warning. He's sending them some very specific information. And when you think about it, it's incredible that it's taking place over there, because that's the very stronghold of the adversary. It's the land that Satan himself has claimed from the beginning, and he's built himself a fortress there. Anyone in the land of Aram who responded positively to the star prophecy could avoid the catastrophe of the day of wrath that is waiting for the inhabitants of that land. Not just for them, but for all 10 of the nations, but especially for those over there. Anybody in that land could know Daniel's time schedule. They could know to look for his star at the appropriate time. They could know what it would mean when that star appeared. And they could kiss the sun lest he be angry. And how would they do that? They would disassociate themselves from the rest of the people. They would properly respond to the fair warning of the impending danger that was given, and they would worship him, the true Christ. That's one of the infallible proofs that Jesus of Nazareth was the Christ. Now, I'm going to run through a few of these examples in the book of Daniel. And I just want to point out that Daniel, along with his companions, are given an opportunity to make a terrific impact upon the people in this country who have an honest heart regarding God. Daniel chapter 2, verse 46. Daniel chapter 2, verse 46. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Now when you read verse 46, look at what that says again. We read that quickly Really, there's a lot here. I'm not going to say a lot about it. You can do the detailed work on your own, but look at verse 46. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped what? Worshipped Daniel. And commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. Oh my goodness. When you see your king, you're a Chaldean, when you see your king fall on his face and worship Daniel, and you hear your king say, of a truth, your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings. What kind of impact does that have on you? Were those wise men around there looking at that? You bet they were. What kind of impact do you think that had on those wise men who witnessed this event? Do you think this was a story they passed down? Oh my goodness. And it was passed down until the time that the star appeared, and some actually came to worship him. It was no accident. Here's another one, Daniel chapter 3. Verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Look at what the response to this is. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Man, all of the big shots in the kingdom are there. King says, I'm going to make a decree. Excuse me, and here it is. That every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after the sword. Praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King, capital K, of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. Can you imagine the influence that had on the people of Babylon? You do understand what God is doing by all this. He is going into the land of Aram, and he has taken the battle directly to the adversary. And he is giving people an opportunity to respond to the true Christ. And they already have everything they need to do that. They've been given a time schedule and a prophecy that tells them that at a particular time a star is going to appear, and when they see that star, then they have a choice to make. Daniel 6 is the testimony given during the lion's den incident. By this time, Babylon has passed off the scene, and the Medes and the Persians are in control. You know the story of the lion's den, so we don't need to rehearse it here. But what I want to point out is the reaction to it, Daniel 6:25. Remember, I told you in these first two parts of the fifth course of punishment, God is putting something on display in the land to give them fair warning. Daniel 6:25. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever. And his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Look at the terminology that's used there in verse 26, and that's a perfect match to the information that was given to Daniel back during the time of Nebuchadnezzar when Babylon was in power, and the vision of the stone that was cut out without hands. Daniel 2:44, just back up to it. It's the last passage I'll take you to because we've already been long enough. We're almost an hour and a half into this thing, and I just need to cut it off here, and we'll pick this up in just a minute in the next session. But Daniel 2:44, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people to break in peace, consume all these kings, and it'll stand forever. Where do you think Darius got that terminology? He's using the exact same terminology that was used back there in Daniel 2 when Nebuchadnezzar was in power and God was doing things. That also, there is something sitting over there that lines up perfectly with the star prophecy that was in the land of Aram before Daniel ever even showed up. All of this has an impact. Okay, now I was going to do more, but look, I'm not going to even do this in the next session. Do it on your own. I told you that not only were there things in, Nebuchadnezzar and Darius and Cyrus, but I also told you could go over to the book of Esther, Mordecai and Esther, and you could add some things to the impact being made over there. So I'll just tell you where it is. Go over to Esther chapter 10. You can sort all that out on your own and see more of what God is doing over in that land to give fair warning to everyone about what's true and what's false, how their land is connected with it, and what they need to do to deliver themselves out of that which is coming. It's to advertise. That's what that is. That's what Balaam carried back with him, the advertisement. Now, in our next session, I do need to take the start of that session and tie up a few more things about the star prophecy. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and work our way through the rest of these. And so we'll do that next time. So, it seemed like it took me a while to kind of get untracked here, but anyway, we'll start doing these in a very timely way and get ourselves back on track. I know some of you are waiting for ordination, and so we'll do that. Okay, God bless you. Study hard. I'll see you soon.